Karen had always prided herself on keeping her neighborhood pristine. As the self-appointed enforcer of the local HOA rules, even though she wasn't technically on the board, she believed it was her duty to maintain order, cleanliness, and what she called an atmosphere of respectful conformity. The neighbors saw her differently, nosy, petty, and constantly meddling in matters that were none of her business. But Karen didn't care about opinions. She cared about rules. So when Tom, a quiet, stoic veteran who had recently moved into the neighborhood, began receiving large packages and what Karen considered excessive mail at his doorstep, she took notice. Tom had served in the military for over 2 decades. He was disciplined, respectful, and most of all, private. After retiring, he bought a modest home at the end of the cul-de-sac, hoping to enjoy a peaceful life surrounded by trees and birdsong rather than conflict. Unfortunately for him, he also moved into Karen's HOA. Tom received a lot of mail. Most of it was from veterans organizations, medical supply companies, government agencies, and personal letters from fellow veterans. Karen thought the piles of envelopes and packages, always neatly stacked by the postman on his porch, were an eyesore. She had filed 2 formal complaints with the HOA, demanding that Tom install a mailbox compliant with her vision of uniformity. He had a mailbox, perfectly legal, but it didn't meet Karen's subjective aesthetic standards. When her complaints were ignored by the HOA board, who were tired of her constant pestering, Karen decided to act on her own. That morning, just after sunrise, she walked briskly to Tom's house, glanced around to make sure no one was watching, and snatched up the mail that had just been delivered. There were 3 packages and a small stack of envelopes. She stuffed them into a reusable grocery bag and marched back to her house as if she had done the community a great favor. What she didn't know was that Tom had installed a security camera the week before. It wasn't because he feared anyone in the neighborhood, it was simply part of his cautious nature. Over the years, being stationed in different parts of the world had taught him to be prepared for anything. The camera, angled toward the porch, had a clear view of Karen's theft. Later that afternoon, Tom reviewed the footage after noticing his mail was missing. He didn't react with anger or aggression, he simply picked up the phone and made a call. When the police arrived at Karen's doorstep 2 hours later, she was already in her garden, pruning hedges with the same intensity she approached everything in life. At first, she greeted the officers with a smile, assuming they were there to inquire about a lost dog or some minor neighborhood issue. But when they asked her directly if she had taken Tom's mail, her demeanor changed. "Why would I steal mail?" she scoffed. "I was simply cleaning up the clutter on his porch. It looked terrible. This is a family community, not a dumping ground." The officer, maintaining a calm tone, explained that tampering with mail, even with the best intentions, was a federal crime. Karen tried to argue, claiming she was doing what the HOA failed to do. She insisted she was maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood and that Tom was being overly sensitive. The officer didn't budge. He asked again, calmly but firmly, whether she had taken the mail. Karen, flustered and feeling cornered, admitted she had, but only because, in her words, he clearly wasn't going to clean it up himself. The officer motioned for his partner, who retrieved a small tablet. They showed Karen the security footage Tom had provided, crystal clear, timestamped, indisputable. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to respond. But no words came out. She stood motionless as the officers read her rights. Karen never imagined that one of her community service actions would end with her being handcuffed on her own front lawn, in full view of the very neighbors she had lorded over for years. A few people peeked through their blinds, 1 or 2 even stepped outside to see what was happening. Tom, standing calmly on his porch, watched without emotion as the woman who had invaded his privacy was taken into custody. The fallout in the neighborhood was immediate. Though some had feared Karen's wrath in the past and chosen to stay quiet, the sight of her being arrested gave many a sense of liberation. Over the next few days, stories began to circulate about other questionable actions Karen had taken over the years. Throwing away Halloween decorations she deemed too gory, removing basketball hoops she said violated WA standards, and even allegedly confronting kids for riding bikes too fast on the sidewalk. It became clear that this was not an isolated incident. It was simply the first time she'd been caught red-handed with undeniable proof. Tom, meanwhile, went about his routine as usual. He didn't revel in Karen's downfall, nor did he gloat when neighbors approached him to express support or sympathy. His only public statement was a quiet reminder posted to the neighborhood bulletin board: "Respect goes both ways. Thank you to those who understand that." As for Karen, she was released later that evening after being booked and processed. She was charged with mail theft under federal statute, which carried serious consequences, including potential jail time and significant fines. Her attorney would later try to argue that her actions were misguided rather than malicious, but the prosecution had the video, the context, and a long list of WA-related complaints that painted a troubling pattern of behavior. Karen tried to return to her normal routine in the days that followed, but things had changed. People avoided her. The friendly greetings she once forced out of others were replaced with cold nods or silence. The WA board, once tolerant of her antics, voted unanimously to remove her from any unofficial involvement with policy enforcement. For the first time in years, Karen felt powerless. What stung most wasn't the legal trouble, it was the realization that the community she claimed to care so much about had never truly been hers to control. It had belonged to everyone, including people like Tom, who had earned his peace, not through neighborhood politics, but through service, sacrifice, and quiet strength. Karen never expected the knock on her door that morning to be from uniformed officers. After all, in her mind, she had done nothing wrong. She was simply enforcing the rules she believed kept the neighborhood pristine and orderly. That was her role as WA president, and she took it seriously. But things had spiraled far beyond what she had imagined, and now her actions were catching up to her. It all began weeks earlier, when James Miller, a retired Marine Corps veteran, moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood with his service dog, Daisy. James had served 3 tours overseas, and after leaving the military, he sought peace and healing. He found what he thought was the perfect home, a small bungalow at the end of the cul-de-sac, far enough from noise, yet close enough to town. The property was well kept, though it needed a few touch-ups, which James was more than willing to take on himself. What he didn't expect was to clash almost immediately with Karen, who prided herself on enforcing every fine detail of the WA guidelines. From mailbox paint color to the height of grass, Karen monitored everything with hawk-like precision. Within days of James moving in, he received a notice for failing to have the approved style of mailbox. He hadn't even unpacked yet. James, used to structure and order, didn't mind playing by the rules, so he promptly ordered the correct mailbox and installed it. He assumed that would be the end of it. But Karen had already labeled him a problem resident. When James placed a modest American flag on a pole in his front yard, he received another notice. Flags, according to Karen's interpretation of WA guidelines, were only allowed on designated holidays. James knew the law. Federal regulations protected the right to display the U.S. flag, but Karen ignored that. When he respectfully cited the legal protections, Karen simply shrugged and muttered, "That doesn't apply here." But what truly escalated things was the mail. Karen had a spare key to the WA-approved mailboxes, installed in a cluster at the end of the street. She claimed it was for emergencies only. But neighbors had long whispered about her checking the boxes whenever she felt something was off. It wasn't long before James began to notice missing mail. Packages marked as delivered never reached him. Letters from the VA went missing. He initially thought it was a USPS issue, until he caught Karen red-handed. One morning, while walking Daisy earlier than usual, James saw Karen at the mailbox cluster. She didn't see him approach. He stood in stunned silence as she opened the compartment marked with his address, rifled through the contents, then pulled out a small stack of letters and a padded envelope. Without hesitation, she walked over to the HOA office shed near the pool and threw the mail in a trash bin. James approached her calmly. Karen, did you just take my mail? Startled, Karen turned around. This mailbox is property of the HOA. That package didn't look secure, and your box has been flagged for review. Flagged by who? You. James asked, incredulous. That's federal mail. You can't just take it. Karen crossed her arms. I can do what I need to do to keep this neighborhood safe and compliant. James didn't raise his voice. Instead, he reached into his jacket, where he had kept his phone recording since he saw her open the mailbox. You may want to rethink that, he said, holding up the phone. Karen paled but said nothing. James turned and walked home. He reported the incident to the local police, who in turn contacted the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Interfering with mail is a federal crime. And thanks to James's clear video evidence, an investigation was quickly opened. Karen still didn't believe anything would happen to her. She even held an emergency HOA meeting to try and have James removed for hostile behavior. But by then, several neighbors who had been too intimidated to speak out began to share their own experiences. Mail had gone missing before, packages opened or delayed, letters never received. When federal agents showed up at her door, Karen tried to play the victim. She cried, insisting she only acted out of concern for suspicious packages. But the agents weren't swayed. She was handcuffed and taken in for questioning. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Local news picked up the story, dubbing it the HOA mailbox scandal. James, for his part, kept quiet. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He just hoped it would bring some peace, not just for him, but for others who had suffered in silence under Karen's overreach. As the investigation continued, more infractions surfaced. Karen had been routinely accessing mailboxes, in clear violation of federal law. Some packages included medication from the VA. One neighbor had missed a crucial job application due to her interference. Another had lost an important legal document. The community, once divided in silent fear, now united behind James. At trial, Karen's defense team argued that she acted without malicious intent. But the evidence told a different story. The judge, unimpressed with her excuses, issued a stern sentence, not just to punish, but to serve as a warning. Karen was convicted of obstruction of correspondence and unauthorized possession of mail, both federal offenses. She was sentenced to 18 months in a federal facility and ordered to pay restitution to affected residents. In the weeks following the verdict, the HOA underwent a full overhaul. A new board was elected, this time with a broader, more inclusive approach to community management. Transparency and respect became the new standard. James was even offered a spot on the board, though he politely declined, saying he preferred to enjoy his quiet life and help where needed without the politics. Neighbors who had once been wary of him now stopped by to chat, thank him, or simply walk their dogs alongside Daisy. The street that once felt controlled and cold began to feel like a real community. And while the scars of Karen's tenure remained, they served as a reminder of the danger of unchecked power. James kept the video he recorded, not out of spite, but as a symbol of accountability, of standing up even when it's hard, and of the quiet power of doing the right thing.